What's up, everybody? Welcome in another new edition of Celtics Beat. And boy, I feel like I almost need to apologize because a lot has happened in the past week since we recorded a show. It began with Brad Stevens making the first trade of his time as president of basketball operations. Kemba Walker, sorry, love you, mean it, but gone off to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who of course probably will flip him somewhere else for more draft picks. Al Horford back with Boston, and plenty to get to there, obviously. The C's no longer have a first-round pick in this draft. Number 16, gone with Walker, a trade of second-round picks, and with Horford, Moses Brown coming on in as well, hoping to part some defenders and continue to pile up games like he did against the C's when he went for 2020 earlier this season. With Evan Valenti, I'm Adam Kaufman. The big news, though, Ev, that we will begin with, and then we can circle back to Walker and Horford and that swap. New head coach. It's all done. It's not been officially announced as we sit here right now, but it is all done. We know it's going to happen. The 18th head coach in Boston Celtics history, and the man who is chasing banner 18, someone that you were very, very highly on all over social media and in shows past. Ime Udoka comes in after 9 years as an assistant in the NBA, 7 learning under future Hall of Famer Greg Popovich. And of course, after that, 1 year with the Sixers, most recently 1 year with the Nets. And that super team that I so passionately rooted against throughout this playoff run. They are all done as we go to the East and West finals now at this stage of June, almost July. But the new head coach, there are a lot of things to like here. I'll let you start. What stands out?
Well, Boston's probably gonna get back to their defensive chops, as that was one of the biggest gripes of the Celtics this year was how bad they were defensively. It just was a complete opposite of what they've been in the entire tenure of Brad Stevens. A notoriously good defensive team, regardless of whoever was trotted out there. They were an overachieving bunch defensively a lot of the time, with smaller point guards all over the place, whether it be Kemba, Isaiah Thomas, Kyrie Irving. They've always been able to manage defensively, and this year was a bad one defensively. So they are going to get back to the defensive roots. It doesn't shock me that Brad was looking for that kind of guy. So at that particular point, I'm just thrilled about a defensive coach that can come in and maybe tweak this team a little bit. Now we will see if the tweaks work. You looked at a couple of things, on the internet, things written about him. A couple of defensive tweaks that he made, to Philadelphia resulted in more turnovers, but it didn't really result in better defensive numbers, so to speak. So we'll see if the personnel in Boston is a little bit better, a little bit different than what they had in Philadelphia. I like that just to start. I like the fact that he's a Greg Popovich clone, or not clone, but he's disciple, worked into that tree. We'll see if, and look, you make the NFL comparison, like the Belichick coaching tree, or the Andy Reid coaching tree, or the Bill Parcells coaching tree. Popovich's coaching tree has had some success, had some not success, depends on, where you're at. Brett Brown being some sort of maddening in between, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see if Ime holds up on that end. And I like the fact this guy has worked with a lot of different players over the years and is a former player himself. So you look at all the things that Boston was looking for, including, and I'm not going to, beat around the bush here, a black head coach. I think that's what they wanted. I think it's not something that they shied away from. I mean, you have Jaylen Brown tweeting that, it wasn't a mistake that 3 of the 4 coaches remaining in the NBA playoffs are black. And then I think at one point, 7 of the 8 remaining were black. I think they wanted someone that could really, connect with their players in a little bit different manner. And Ime checks all these boxes. And so, you look at the guys that they've brought in, or girls they've brought in, women they've brought in for candidates to interview. Ime, I think, might check the most boxes of anyone that they interviewed.
Well, I think one thing that is obviously very important with regard to connecting with the players, like you talked about, this has been well reported, is the fact that Ime Udoka comes in having reportedly gotten the seal of approval, and not just the seal of approval, but, a very high recommendation from Celtics players, stars, budding superstars, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, plus Marcus Smart and even Kemba Walker before, them as well, because all of those guys were with Udoka at, Team USA in the FIBA World Championship tournament a couple of summers ago. And, Brad Stevens, in talking about he didn't talk about this yet as we sit here now, but in talking about the Kemba Walker Al Horford trade, said that he has throughout this offseason, not different than being a head coach, but I think, different than being a head coach. He has been in regular touch with with his core players about the future of this organization. I'm sure they were consulted to some degree about the Horford Walker swap, and obviously definitely consulted with regard to who's the next head coach of this team going to be. I mean, did it need to get their approval? In today's NBA, I think it did, quite frankly. Now, should they have had the final say? No, that's obviously different. You want to go with someone that you are most comfortable with as an organization. Obviously, as you said, Udoka checks a slew of boxes as to why he's a great candidate. And there's, whether he was your top choice, whether that was Chauncey Billups, whether it was Kara Lawson or Becky Hammond or Darvin Ham, or, you name it, no question, Ime Udoka comes in very, very qualified for this job. And I really do think, at least on paper, he's going to do a great job. Reputationally, seems like he's going to do a great job. But, a lot of people felt at the time of his hire, it was, oh my God, what took so long? Like this, he's interviewed for head coaching jobs in the past. As I said, has been an assistant the last 9 years. We're going to learn a lot more about him later on in this show with Jeff Garcia, who has covered the Spurs the last two and a half decades at this point for the Locked On Spurs and other outlets, in addition to that podcast. But it does seem like, I mean, this is a real, players guy, but also, there can be a negative connotation to that, being a player's guy. It's like, oh, so does he go easy? No, a player's guy in that he can be friendly with you, but he can also be a disciplinarian. Rudy Gay, talking to our pal Jeff Goodman, said that he's not a guy who shies away from shooting you straight. He can be your friend, he can joke around, he can be loose, but he'll come at you if he needs to as well. And I think that's it's certainly a great trait of an assistant coach, but it's absolutely an even better trait as a head coach. And so he's going to come in clearly with the built-in already respect of a lot of the guys that are on this team, that are on this roster, that are around this league. And I think that's, that absolutely is a difference maker, because taking nothing away from what, who Brad Stevens was, what he achieved, what he was at Butler, all of that, he was an unknown commodity coming to the NBA. You knew what he was in the college game. You knew, his teams overachieved, and they overachieved a lot in Boston, until these last couple of years as well. But I think for younger players who, quite frankly, were too young to give a damn what, the Brad Stevens Butler teams were doing way back when, like Jason Tatum wasn't actively watching those games, or Jaylen Brown and guys like that. For this individual and Ime Udoka to come in with the reputation that he has, and having already worked with him on the world stage, I think that makes a big difference.
I agree with that. I agree with a lot of that. I think Boston has, been able to sift through the things that they're looking for. Again, a guy that's a great communicator is going to be one of those things. And Brad, I think, is a pretty effective communicator for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that needs to be able to make adjustments. You're seeing what adjustments can do for a team like the LA Clippers, who are without their best player in Kawhi Leonard, and them trying to figure out what kind of lineup combination works. And I know they lost game 2 against Phoenix, but almost pulled that one out. They pulled out the series against the Utah Jazz. A guy that can make adjustments is a big thing. I'm thrilled for the fact that Ime has gone through all these, different ranks and done all these things and worked his way up. Is finally getting a shot here. This is all good stuff. I'm really pumped about it. And the fact that he's going to be reconnected with, and just to tie this in, because this is what we do. He's already worked with Al Horford, who's the newly minted, not centerpiece, but a newly minted Celtic who's already been a Celtic, sort of, kind of, I think it's a good thing as well to have already a rapport with Al Horford. Again, having rapport with guys. And that was a big thing about, Kemba Walker. He that offseason, he was working with Jason Tatum, I think, during a Jordan Brand photo shoot. So having connections with players already in the team that have been here is a big thing. And then Al coming in, I know he spoke earlier today about it and how he's, excited to get back to work with him. And this is great. Again, all these things are really good. Yes. Is he unproven? Absolutely. But, so is Brad. So.
Yeah, it'll be fun, I think, and we'll reserve some of our conversation about Ime, because again, Jeff Garcia is going to join us later in the show, and that'll be all about Ime and his background and time in the NBA as a player, as an assistant, what he brings to this team, his character, some good stories. His, obviously it's been written about his ability as a recruiter with LaMarcus Aldridge, and just how well he vibes and meshes with a lot of the players in today's game, world stage or otherwise. And of course, learning under Greg Popovich and bouncing around, working with superstars. I think it's all incredibly notable. Some of the key words that you hear, that you read with regard to Ime, though, and we've hit on a lot of it, like you said, defensive minded. I think that's very important. You know, a grinder, great work ethic, experienced, you know, someone obviously that's been around, like we talked about, and bounced around as well. I mean, in some ways, a journeyman coach, much as he was a journeyman player, but learning obviously both as a player and as a coach at the feet of Greg Popovich for the bulk of his experience in both those categories, I think is significant. And Brad and Pop having the relationship that they do, I'm sure there were multiple conversations along the way between them about Ime, in addition to just Ime's multiple interviews with the Celtics. And Chauncey was a candidate for, multiple interviews as well, according to reports, Ham as well. And, quite frankly, we don't know if Becky Hammond, Carol Lawson, Jason Kidd, Rick Carlisle, like you name it, we don't know if they even really were in consideration, or if Boston drilled down to its top three and went there and made its choice going forward. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Ime and just, I know that in listening to him do interviews in the past, Evan, he's talked about the ideal identity of his team and how important it is to work hard and to be versatile. And, quite frankly, a lot of the things that we've heard from Brad in years past, it's just now it becomes a function of, as Brad talked about earlier this month when he was talking about the transition going from, Danny's job to his job to now, this new job that was Danny Ainge's job. It's, this can be really good for the locker room. He didn't say like, yeah, players tune me out at the end, but he sort of said it in that this can be, revitalizing or whatever the word was that he specifically used. It could be rejuvenated. It can be something that's really important for the players as far as just a refresher for all of them to sync back up to where they need to be. Because unfortunately, like for better or worse, and like Greg Popovich and Eric Spoelstra and guys like that, like they're the anomaly, obviously. After a while, your voice does go stale in a locker room, in a clubhouse, in a, wherever, a dressing room. It's like that does happen no matter what you think of the coach. And I was still a Brad Stevens guy. No matter what you think of the coach, players do eventually just, they need a change. They need a change to kind of, wake them back up. And hopefully with the way that Ime Udoka has command of the room, as we hear about, he can be that person.
Yeah. And just, quickly here as we move on, because I know we gotta get to Jeff. I do want to talk a little bit about just this Kemba Walker trade, moving him out for Al Horford. Again, yep. All these things that have come out afterwards in terms of what camp feels what. I mean, obviously it feels a little targeted. Jared Weiss of The Athletic, good friend of ours, and a good friend of the program, did some digging on that. Kemba was maybe a little frustrated with Brad a little frustrated with Kemba. I'm sure both those things are true. But, the fact of the matter is Boston got out from a contract that's really tough to move. Mm-hmm. For a guy that's going to decrease in terms of salary over the next year, a guy that's familiar with their system. Yeah. And is just, it's a bummer just because I enjoyed Kemba, the healthy part that they had with him. And I feel cheated a little bit, as I felt cheated with the Hayward thing and the Kyrie thing. It's just, I feel terrible, but they got out of a contract that they need to get out of, no question.
Yeah. And you bring back as Brad said, you bring back a known commodity. You bring back a guy with institutional knowledge, someone that, and the game plan may be different. That's going to be up to Udoka at this point for how he's going to run his team, but he's already familiar with, working with a good chunk of this roster, having not been gone for too long. And, I do think, I do believe even at, 35 or whatever he is, there is some good still in Al Horford's game if you manage him, if you utilize him the right way. And he's certainly fresh, hasn't only played half the year last year, front half, before Oklahoma City sat him down and said, we're going to develop the kids. I like Moses Brown too, but we can save, more of that conversation about, about Al even and how he slides back in, about Brown going forward, and even about Kemba, as obviously he has a new home, at least for now, to adjust to, and maybe he gets flipped again to the Knicks or somewhere else, depending on what, Presti does out there with OKC. But as you alluded to, and we've been talking about, it's really, this is the Ime Udoka show. And so we're going to get to Jeff Garcia in just a minute.
Hi, guys. Cedric Maxwell here. I want to take a minute to tell you about Marigold Medical. I'm used to keeping my body in great shape, but with arthritis, even the most simple everyday tasks became unbearable. As soon as I called Marigold Medical, I knew I was in good hands. No drugs, no surgery, just an experienced team of caring professionals. that wanted to get me back to doing the things I love. Make the call to Marigold Medical and get back to pain-free life.
All right, now that we have Evan's thoughts, my thoughts all behind us, let's get some thoughts, quite frankly, from somebody who matters more, someone who has more experience with the new Celtics coach and covering him on a day-to-day basis, getting to know the man a little bit. Ime Udoka, of course. This is Jeff Garcia. He's kind of a rival of ours in this podcast network because he is the host of the Locked On Spurs podcast, also News 4 San Antonio digital writer. Jeff, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. And hey, no competition here, man. I've always had a healthy respect for your team, the Boston Celtics. My dream back in the day was the Spurs Big Three going up against the Boston Big Three back in the day. I wanted that to happen so bad.
Well, our dream back in the day was Tim Duncan landing in Boston and never going to San Antonio.
I didn't want to bring that up. I didn't know if that was a sensitive topic for you guys, but yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at what point in time, Evan, is it no longer a sensitive topic? I mean, it's always going to be one of the greatest what ifs in Celtics history, no question about that. But I guess, it was 97. They've won a championship since. Obviously, the Spurs had, their very Patriot-like success even before the Patriots, up around here. So we're getting over it slowly, even still.
Yeah. You guys let's put it this way: you guys got a better, more future optimism than the Spurs are still in knee deep in rebuild mode.
Yeah, it takes a while to get out of that, but all you need is one lucky roll of the dice, or whatever you want to call it, combination of the lottery balls to totally change the outcome of your franchise. Hopefully for the Detroit Pistons, with Cade Cunningham coming to town, that'll happen for them. Yeah, I mean, look, nobody will ever get over the Tim Duncan thing because they clearly tanked so hard to get Tim Duncan, and it was very clearly worth it. Okay, it wasn't like it wasn't worth it. That was definitely a guy you tank for. Go ahead.
I was low key going tank this past season with the Spurs, so they didn't hear that. I should have been a little louder, maybe they would have heard my hint. But no.
Too good to tank, man. You can't be tanking with DeMar DeRozan. Come on now.
Yeah, I know. Well, hopefully brighter days are ahead for the Spurs, but I know definitely, there's definitely brighter days ahead for your team. Some guy that used to wear silver and black and a boat and a tie for the San Antonio joined your team recently.
Let's get into that. Let's talk about Ime Udoka, because obviously, like I said, Evan and I have shared our thoughts, and our thoughts really are rooted in what you hear, what you read. You have the personal experience with Ime Udoka. Yeah. What should we know about this guy? We'll get, I promise, more specific with our questions, but general thoughts. I mean, what does he bring to the table? What kind of man is he?
Well, you know what? He is a go-getter in the full respect of that phrasing, because it wasn't for him. LaMarcus Aldridge would not be in San Antonio for amount of years that he was. It was Ime who brought in LMA. It was Ime who went above and beyond to chase LaMarcus Aldridge. Why is that a highlight for Spurs fans or the Spurs fan base? Because never in their history have they ever had a marquee free agent join their team, ever. LMA was the first. And yeah, you may point to Popovich and at that time, the mystique of the Spurs being championship team, but Ime had a huge hand on that. What does that lead to? Recruiting. He's a player guy. He's been there, done that with teams. Been there with Portland, did with San Antonio. He's worn the uniform, and now he's wearing the coat and jacket and tie there. And so you look at what he brings to your Celtics. He's bringing recruitment aspect, years of experience on the bench with San Antonio and Philly. And I know I get there's the Spurs mystique, there's the Spurs culture and the learning the lessons from Popovich. I get all that. But even when he left San Antonio, he still went to, I guess, Spurs 2.0, because he went to Philly at that time. It was Brett Brown. Yeah. So Brett Brown carried that over. So Brett Brown saw an edge for that. So said, hey, here's a guy who is in that culture that I was in. I'm going to bring him with me. He became the first lead assistant coach. And then, good news, you guys picked him up as a head coach. So all in all, great pickup. Great. I could not picture a better fit for the former Spur.
Something that a lot of Celtics fans have really had trouble with over the better part of the last decade, when Brad Stevens was the head coach coming out of Butler. And this wasn't, an attack on Brad as in he can't do it. I mean, it became that eventually for a lot of people. But from the outset, it wasn't a he can't do this. It was a how is he going to do this coming out of college? And that is work with superstars. Doc Rivers obviously say what you want about him as a head coach. I happen to think he is wildly overrated, and that's a whole other conversation. And I felt that way when he was in Boston, by the way, not just since. But obviously, he had the ability to work with star players and a good leader of men and all of that. Brad hasn't had a ton of superstars, at his disposal in Boston, but obviously it didn't work out with Kyrie Irving. You got a couple of young budding superstars right now in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Classify the likes of Kemba Walker, Gordon Hayward, Al Horford, however you'd like. But you look at Ime Udoka, and obviously whether it was being teammates in the league with guys like Tim Duncan, who's recently a Hall of Famer, playing or coaching Kawhi Leonard, obviously in his time in San Antonio, the recruitment, as you said, of LaMarcus Aldridge goes to Philadelphia. Joel Embiid is there. Ben Simmons is there. Again, classify him however you'd like. And then most recently with the Nets, Kyrie, Kevin Durant, James Harden. Apparently he was pretty tight with James Harden and getting him to buy in defensively. How big an asset is that in terms of his ability to have superstars respect him just coming in, just walking through the door? What's that going to do for Boston?
Absolutely. You nailed the head. There's not only it's going to be like if I'm a free agent looking to where am I going to take my talents? And there's Boston on the table. Man, they got Tatum, they got Brown, and they got Ime Udoka. That is huge. And you can't tell me that just because he's retired that LaMarcus Aldridge doesn't have cell phone and he's not going to be calling these free agents and be saying, yeah, no, Ime's not a bad guy to play for. Look what he did for me. Look what he did in San Antonio with the Nets, with Philly. You put everything together, Adam, and you got yourself a ready-made coach that has been through the grind, paid his dues, and then some, and now is given an opportunity. And the good news is that the team is pretty good. He's going to have a good launching pad for him to start his coaching career on the right foot. If anything, I think your team is going to be energized by this. It's new blood in. It's a guy that we mentioned, played the game and then coached the game and now is going to be a head coach of the game. So you put that all together. I think right now this team is on the right direction. You kind of got rid of the bad vibes with Brad there. That I think that was a smart decision. Move on. It obviously wasn't working right. It was working good, just working and not enough to push it over. Ime is going to push it over. I promise you, he's going to push over the hump that Boston needs to go be deeper and a longer playoff run. And wouldn't be surprised if maybe, it does get revealed that if a big name free agent does land in Boston, that, he's going to say Ime had a lot to do with it.
The sentiment from a lot of people around the league at the, from the outset of the report, the Celtics landed Ime Udoka as also, by the way, the first new head coach named. Obviously, we've, had Rick Carlisle go back to Indiana since, but Ime Udoka was the first. And what was really interesting was most of the reaction around the league, from peers or coaches or whomever, it wasn't, oh my God, this is such a great hire. The first thing was, oh my God, what took so long?
Yeah.
Did it always feel that way in San Antonio when he was a player and then obviously as an assistant coach for as long as he was it, it's just a matter of time until this guy gets his opportunity?
Yeah. Not only was it that, it was more, even when he left, the sentiment was good for you, Ime, because that's kind of a big thing in San Antonio right now. And it's getting magnified 100 times this offseason is what is going on with the coaching future. Pop is up there in age, and we've had this time and time, Adam, over and over again, years in past, like, oh, when Pop's going to hang up? Well, that was a different version of Pop, and you had a guy named Kawhi Leonard and some other guy named Tim Duncan and Manu and, LMA. So I get why maybe those retirement thoughts were kind of tempered, but this year is being magnified. And I'll circle back to Ime in a bit, is because of what's going on with him. Like, are you gonna retire Pop or not? Because we're seeing it right now with the possibility of Becky leaving. It's a strong possibility, with Portland knocking on her door. So for Ime, I think him deciding to leave San Antonio was a good move because at that time you just don't know what Pop's gonna do. You had guys that possibly could have leapfrogged him. Right now, one name aside from Becky is Will Hardy, another hot commodity among the coaching ranks right now. Like, will he land somewhere? So I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to say it. It looks like Pop sometimes is holding up the team, as far as that position. So for Ime to pack his bags and take that opportunity in Philadelphia to join Brett Brown and then go from there to the Nets, which by the way still has a splash of Spursism in there. Sean Marks, you know, he cut his teeth with San Antonio in the GM office there in the front office. So he's coming in with hunger. He's coming in with I have been ready for this moment and I ain't gonna let it go. And I think that's the type of coach you're going to have. He's going to seize the moment. He's going to put his best foot forward, and it's going to impact positively the roster.
Yeah, I think my big question, comes just in terms of what to expect with Ime. I think everything you read about him, brilliant defensive mind, a guy that makes adjustments on the fly, all these things that you like to hear. Now, Boston this year defensively, notoriously a good defensive team, was just I would call it mediocre defensively that the entire year. Although, yeah, they were bad. And it's one of these things where okay, it'd be nice to re-energize the team a little bit, but to get back to those defensive roots. And it seems like everywhere he goes, that seems to be one of his big calling cards, that and communication. So my big question revolves around offensively. Can he bring some of that Spurs style of ball movement with him? Because everybody looked at the Spurs, especially the year they came back and beat Miami after losing in heartbreaking fashion in 7 games to Miami Heat. You have an offense at that time that looked, worlds better than everybody else. I mean, the ball movement was beautiful. I mean, I think having Boris Diaw on that team helps a little bit. Having Tim Duncan on that team helps a little bit in terms of, getting bigs that can pass and can move. And Ime has talked about that, I think, with B-Ball Breakdown on our very own favorite coach, Nick. Talked about how valuable it is to have bigs that can really pass. And Boston has to that can translate with Robert Williams and now Al Horford coming back to the fold here. But I just, this team, one of the biggest criticisms of Brad Stevens over the past couple of years has been just what happens to their offense a lot late in games and how it looks like just it stalls out routinely.
Right.
In your opinion, Jeff, what are we looking at from an offensive standpoint with Ime? Because he's so known as a defensive guy. Is he a guy that might need a coordinator to come in and help him on that end, or does he have more to the offensive side of the game than we know right now?
I think that's exactly an area of concern is the offensive end. Look, defensive end, he did that as a player, he did as a coach. Great. You got that down, Ime. But what can you do on the offensive end? Good news is that he just left Brooklyn. So there's a booklet there that he probably will take with him. Look, and the coaches admitted it. Everybody knows everybody's playbook. So you're going to see a little splash of what you saw in Brooklyn, a splash of what you saw in 2014 beautiful game mode. You mentioned Williams, the bigs in Boston. I think they're going to lend to that. And you also look at what he did in Philadelphia. He was around, Ben Simmons, getting him some looks. And, as long as he doesn't go to the free throw, Ben Simmons is okay. You look at Joel Embiid. I think Evan and Adam, I think you look at this coach right now, you say, you know what? I would not be surprised if he asked for a little help on the offensive end, but I think it'll come along. And I think he'll be okay. He'll be all right. Now, is he going to have you guys going to have a show about, Ime, what were you thinking with that playmaking calls? Yeah, you're probably going to have it. You're probably going to have those kind of chats on your show. But I think that will get smoothed out as the season moves on.
To your point about asking for help, I think back to, this didn't it happened with Brad Stevens to a degree in that he brought in, Evan, maybe you can remember, but his name is escaping me right now, but a longtime assistant coach who had.
You got Ron Adams?
Yeah, Ron Adams. When Brad came
he
in,
left
Ron
very
Adams
quickly though.
he was only around for a year or so, but still, at least that it helped to the transition to the NBA.
Yeah.
Now, Ime has been around, obviously. He was a player for parts of 7 seasons, an assistant the last 9. He's he knows what to expect. He's not new to this level by any stretch, but again, he's never been a head coach. So sort of in the same way that Steve Nash had Mike D'Antoni on his staff last year in Brooklyn, what kinds of guys do you expect Ime to surround himself with when it comes to potentially blowing everybody out here and rebuilding the bench, to his liking with regard to assistants? Like, is he going to potentially look for a previous head coach to come in who's maybe offensive minded, like you said, and, be on that bench with him, offer him support?
Yeah, he'll probably look at Brooklyn, see if any of the guys want to pack up with him. I can see the Jerry Maguire scene right now. Who's coming with me?
Yeah.
Who's coming with me? I could definitely see that happening around with Ime, even looking at Philly's way and then looking at San Antonio's way. Who's coming with me? Yeah, I absolutely right. I think he'll look. Now, as far as names are concerned, I don't have a name off the top of my head, who will join him. I wouldn't be surprised if like a Kenny Atkinson were to go with them. I could see that. They teamed up in Brooklyn. That'd be a nice pairing for you guys out in Boston if Kenny wants to do that. Yeah. So I think he's gonna definitely pull a page out of what you just mentioned right now with Steve Nash looking at Mike D'Antoni. I could definitely see Ime looking at Coach X, for the offensive help. But all in all, Spurs fans, their sentiment has always been like, you know what? They look back and like, Ime may have been a coach that got away. I think that's kind of like the sentiment, like the overlooked coach on that bench next to Pop. Like, what about that guy? It was always Becky, rightfully so. She earned her stripes too. And then there was other guys like Ettore Messina, Budenholzer, James Borrego. You had those kind of names ahead of Ime. So I can see why he left. Like he's not going to get a shot at that first assistant seat at that moment in time. So he took off to go with the first assistant with Brett Brown. It's just logical. I mean, if I'm looking for a promotion in my job, and I see an opportunity at company B, I'm going to take it, where it gets me a level up and more pay. Yeah, sure. Same thing happened here. But now as Spurs fans are seeing the transition that is going to happen sooner or later with Popovich, they're now looking at Ime saying, maybe they should have kept him around.
We've been saying for a while, going back to midseason, if not earlier, certainly not when we had any clue that this is where we were going to be, that Brad Stevens was going to be elevated, Danny Ainge was going to retire, and all of a sudden there'd be a new head coach. We've been saying that it would be beneficial for Brad to surround himself with the types of people that you're talking about, or just in general, would it be helpful? And this is why, Evan, and we talked about it earlier, Evan's been on the Ime Udoka train for a while. I was really more on the Chauncey Billups train from the perspective of, not unlike Udoka, former player in the league, different obviously than Brad in that respect, but also someone who's experienced really a bit of everything. Billups went from being a very high draft pick to kind of a journeyman, bounced around quite a bit before he found his footing, to an all-star, an all-NBA guy, a champion, best player on a championship team, all of that stuff, finals MVP, maybe even eventually, and I think so, a Hall of Famer. Udoka, it's a different path, had to climb his way from, at that point, the D League, the development league, to, someone that also bounced around, spent most of his time there in San Antonio, parlayed that obviously into a job on the bench being an assistant coach, but went from someone who was, couldn't buy in an opportunity, Jeff, to someone that, eventually started every game for the Blazers, his hometown team one season. So what does his experience as a player provide not only him as he looks to become a head coach and is a head coach, but, players within that locker room who, for so long have been looking toward like, where's the guy that I can talk to who's been through this?
Yeah.
Well, now they have that guy. Yeah.
He's definitely a player's coach. He definitely is. You can see it. What he did in San Antonio was interesting. You would always see him talk to the guys off to the side, all constantly. He was very communicating his thoughts, his directions with the players when he was in San Antonio, directions, at that time, you could already start seeing the well, it was supposed to be the big three era, Timmy to Kawhi. So he was really talking with Kawhi a lot. I remember that, just chatting with them as best he could. Trust me, I remember those Kawhi chats. They were interesting, but nevertheless, you look at Ime, and I think he is going to be exactly that type of players coach that this young Boston Celtics team needs. Look, nothing to take away with Chauncey. He'll get a shot, but here's a player that has gone through the coaching ranks, gone through the coaching experience, versus maybe somebody who really hasn't.
Yeah,
I mean, and I think if you're Boston, you weigh the two. Like Chauncey's a great candidate, as of Ime, but if you want a head coach, which one put their time in that department? That was Ime. So you want to give it to Ime, and I think that was a smart decision. Look, maybe he might tell Chauncey, join me in my assistant coach rank. I mean, who knows? That could happen. That could play out too. We don't know yet. But I think at the end of the day, you're looking at a player's coach that is just simply going to just use what he went through, his grind as a player and a coach, and positively infect the locker room with that. Like, hey guys, I know what you did. I know I've been here before. I get it. Follow me. I know what I'm doing. I think that's gonna go well because he just throw out his resume he wanted. I've been taught under Popovich. I've been taught under the Philadelphia system with their Embiid and the process, all that stuff. I get what y'all are going to go through, and I'm going to bring that here. I have the defensive chops as a player and a coach. I'm going to get better at offense, and I got this guy who's going to help me. All in all, I think he's just very honest, and he's going to be very straightforward with these guys. Look, if he learned anything in his time in San Antonio, it just shoot straight with these players. Pop will shoot straight with the players and not hold back. I hope he's going to bring that to Boston, because I think sometimes that's what these young players need in the league, just a straight shooter.
Evan, I really do like, too, the fact that, and I don't remember, it might have been our pal Keith Smith that tweeted this out, but somebody wrote it, that the Celtics were first. Like, they got the guy that they wanted in that, let's say Billups had landed in Portland, the day before the news broke from Woj about the Celtics going with Udoka. A lot of people would have said, well, Celtics got their second choice. Billups was the guy. They interviewed him multiple times. He left. He went somewhere else. Udoka was the second guy. By hiring Udoka first, obviously, that shows, it proves, right or wrong, we'll find out over time, but it proves they got their top candidate. And that part I do like.
Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of positives to go with here. And the biggest one is just the fact that he's had the ear of so many great players for the past decade. And I mean, you got 3 of them in Brooklyn right now. And I once it became clear that Udoka was a serious candidate, I started paying a little more attention to his demeanor on the sidelines in Brooklyn. Again, he's constantly in the ear of Kevin Durant. There's been the quotes now that he was in the ears of James Harden throughout the entire season. I'm sure at some point he had a conversation or two with Kyrie as best he could. Talking with Ben Simmons, helping Ben with certain things during, off to the side while someone else is shooting free throws. There's, Ime talking with Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid or, Tobias Harris or, name player X on Philadelphia, all the great players he's dealt with in San Antonio. And what's important to me is the type of player he's dealt with in San Antonio, right? You're talking about a team that's like lauded for the development of role guys over the years. I mean, it is about Manu and Tony and Timmy and Kawhi, no question. But it just seemed like at the height of the powers of the San Antonio Spurs, it didn't matter like what role guy it was, whether it was Bonner or Pat Mills or give me a second here.
Danny Green.
Danny Green has been Danny Green's a really good one. I don't know why I didn't think about that. But they've had so many role guys over the years that they've identified as fits to their system. And that's the thing right now that bothered me the most about this past season with the Boston Celtics is you had a team that had at the end of their bench a bunch of guys that weren't capable of a whole lot. Sure. And if they can find a way to strike a balance between him and Brad and identifying talent and developing that talent to be, the role guys they really need to enhance Jason and Jalen, this is going to be a huge home run. So, like, again, the Chauncey Billups things I get. He's the exact type of former player you're looking for. There is a little there's some checkered history with Chauncey Billups that I think needs to be brought up at some point when he's finally introduced as a head coach somewhere, because that's going to happen. He's got the ears of everybody. But Ime has a lot of similar credentials, but just has more of that coaching aspect that I think they truly need. Someone that's been through some stuff. And then you get the Team USA stuff where he's worked with how many guys at Team USA. So to me, it felt like once they settled on their top 3 guys of Darvin Ham, Chauncey Billups, and Ime, it felt more like to me as a guy that can go out and start to really dig deeper, that Ime was the best choice all along, in my opinion.
Yeah, Evan, when I look at Ime, and as far as whether it had been Boston or anywhere else, my first thought also was plug and play. That's what I felt like. He's just a plug-in coach, and he's going to get these guys playing. And it's interesting, though, when you look back at his history in San Antonio, I don't know, just do a generic Getty image search, and you'll see him as a coach and as a player, really always next to Pop There's photos of Pop and him, ear to ear, talking with each other. There's photos of him in the huddle right next to Pop on the bench. He's leaning over other coaches ahead of him with a clipboard, like, hey, look, reaching out to Pop. So you can tell that he's been eager for this. He's been wanting this for quite some time. And I just don't see him, just fumbling the ball at the 1 yard line. I think he's really going to go in there and do a bang up job for you guys, Evan.
Something interesting that, in relation to what Evan brought up that I really hadn't thought about, something that obviously the Spurs have been renowned for during the Greg Popovich, R.C. Buford era, and obviously Ime was there for a lot of that, is this is just a team that drafts really well. It is absolutely a team that drafts well. And quite frankly, and look, he's gotten his criticisms, but I think generally speaking, Danny Ainge has drafted better than he is not. He has been an above average drafter during the time that he was obviously running that front office. We don't know what kind of drafter Brad Stevens is going to be when that time comes around. He doesn't have the first rounder now this year after that, trade involving Walker and Horford.
Right.
And, to filter it down, a head coach only has so much say in that process as opposed to the GM, the president of basketball ops. And certainly in San Antonio, an assistant coach has almost seemingly no voice in that process. That being said, you're around, you observe things, you hear things. How much of that success, that draft success that Ime was around for and maybe conceivably to some degree a part of, can he also bring to Boston for that end, for
right.
the role players, the draft and development, all of it, and helping Brad out?
Yeah, that's a great point because, during his time, he's with the Spurs as an assistant coach. I got it here from 12 to 19. Okay. So look what happened in the 12 to 19. Obviously, they won a title. So he has championship pedigree already right there. So boom, check, big check. What does it take to get out of a series and move on? Check. That Spurs team was already young and in transition. I'll circle back to the draft thing. So you had a guy named DeJounte Murray who was already starting, who maybe was buried on the bench at that time, but, he was witnessing and watching. You saw Ime and Murray really communicating quite a bit during their time together in San Antonio. So then you start seeing what happened with Tony Parker. That moment he blew out his knee or his leg, so a big leg injury at Houston. Okay, so here goes Murray. He's inserted immediately into that thing. So, and then he's seen Pop like, hey, I got to rely on this role. At that time, a role player, a young kid, go in there and he got the best out of him. He saw what that high, at least for the Spurs at that time, that high draft pick, DeJounte Murray turned into. And I think you're going to see that. And I think when he sees what they did with guys like Murray, sticking them in Austin for the G League, when he saw that they drafted some kid by the name of, who was there around that time? 2019. So yeah, Keldon Johnson maybe, or Lucas Samanic,
Yeah,
I think maybe at
the everything pre-pandemic's a fog, man.
For a while during the pandemic season, I kept on saying like this summer, and it was gonna be winter. I was like, because your mind gets trained to that. But I just think that he saw the Spurs process. He went through two processes: the Spurs process and the Philly process. The Spurs process was draft, develop, send them to Austin, let them get their chops, get recalled every once in a while, get some X minutes, and then go back. Pop is notorious for that. There was a moment, Adam, which baffled me a few seasons ago. Lonnie Walker gets recalled from the Austin Spurs G League team. Has an amazing few games at the time for his standards. It was really, really good. A few games later, Pop is asked about Lonnie. Hey, your thoughts on the young kid? Oh, in a nutshell, I'm saying this, I don't see any competitive fire out of him. Sorry. And everyone was just like, what are you talking about? The kid just lit up tonight, they sent him to Austin. And you get the mind trick that my Pop's doing. He's trying to get the best out of this kid. Like, that's not good enough. I got to up my game more, Pop. I think Ime sees those type of player coach, those kind of interactions that Pop did with his young guys and what it'll help for development wise for them. Maybe hopefully Ime is not as rough, but on these kids, but sometimes a little tough love goes a long way. And I think you couple that with the Spurs being able to have a proven track record to get the best out of players that have just filled the role, and he got a good chunk of it. for 7 years in San Antonio. Wouldn't be surprised if you're going to start seeing, what was it, the Red Claws get used a little bit more often next season.
Last one before we let you go here.
Yes, sir.
Are we going to see Nia Long around the Garden?
You know what? I never saw her in San Antonio.
This is going to be heartbreaking for Celtics fans. We got her trending on Twitter yesterday. I say we like I was part of this. I was not. But
I mean, I'm sure you tweeted about her, so you're part of it.
Nia Long being courtside at any point is going to set Boston on a blaze. Basically, it's gonna be amazing.
I never saw her in San Antonio.
Yeah, but she was the assistant coach's wife then,
right?
Or fiance, whatever. Their partnership classification.
Yeah.
But now she's like the first. She's going to be the first lady of Celtics Village here.
Yeah.
If she was in the AT&T Center, either they just kept it very, very low key, because not many movie stars go to San Antonio to check games. You have your usual suspects. You have your Tommy Lee Jones that shows up like a lot. Your Eva Longoria. I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, Ricardo Chavia. He does. He was a Desperate Housewife. He was actually even Lagoria's TV husband.
Oh, okay. I remember.
Yeah. He shows up a lot. But if Nia Long was there, they sure didn't announce it. They didn't make it known. But no, but you're right. Yeah, she'll probably be in one of the booths, cheering on her husband and the team, and shouting out you guys on your podcast. So hopefully she does all that good stuff. Yeah, she's gonna do that. Yeah.
Only a matter of time before she comes on the pod, no doubt.
Yeah, one day Eva Longoria will shout out Locked On Spurs, but I don't see that happening. So,
well, Jeff Garcia does a great job covering the Spurs. Locked On Spurs podcast. Again, the digital writer for News 4 San Antonio. And thanks so much for coming on and
yes,
giving us a lot of background because, we haven't heard from the guy yet. We're getting to know him a little bit through people like you, so we appreciate it.
Anytime, gentlemen. You got my number.
All right. Well, I suspect by the time we do our next show, we will have heard from Ime Udoka for the first time. Just waiting as we record right now for the official announcement from the Celtics, and probably right around the corner. Matter of fact, it'll probably come out somewhere between finishing the show and the show being, published for consumption, because that's the kind of luck that we have. But it'll be great. It's all but official. Ime Udoka, the next coach of the Boston Celtics. Number 18, chasing banner 18. Jeff Garcia, Evan Valenti, I'm Adam Kaufman. We'll talk to you again next week.